welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm your host Scott Mowbray, and in each episode I will discuss the key topics that impact on football coaching in the foundation and youth development phases. Thanks for listening, I hope you enjoy this episode. Sam, welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, Scott. Thanks for having me. Such a pleasure.
It's definitely my honour, and it's nice to turn the tables a little bit. I can't work out what's harder, Sam. Is it better to ask the questions or answer the questions, or should we give it an hour and then you can answer that one?
Depends what questions you're asking.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, we'll come on to your podcast in a bit if that's okay, which I absolutely love. But we'll come on to that. But just a bit about you. Where are you based?
Sheffield.
And if you don't mind, then Sam, just a bit about kind of your sports plan and kind of coaching journey.
All the way from the beginning?
Yeah, why not? Come on. It's good to know. Do you know what? I think, Sam, I know this is one of the things a lot of people do, but for me, it really helps with the context of the conversation. If you know someone's background a little bit, then when they share their thoughts and ideas, you can kind of, position it better for your own sake. So honestly, for me, I'd rather know a bit more about, I've listened to stuff you're currently doing and things, and I've got my own ideas about maybe where you've come from and what you've done. But it's nice sometimes to have a bit more meat on the bone, just so I can get the context around it. So yeah, go on, talk about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I guess suppose if I start from my journey as an athlete, I actually started as a swimmer. So I was one of these that swam 5, 6, 7 times a week from the age of 7 till about 12. Where eventually just got to a point where I think just mental burnout. I just completely fell out of love with the sport. So I wasn't really a kid that really grew up watching football. I didn't really play football until about 12. But my brother played, and my dad eventually started a junior football team. So he was a coach, so I ended up going and just playing for them. I was 2 years older, but went to the sessions, suddenly fell in love with this wonderful game of football or soccer, as we call it. And yeah, it kind of started from there, started playing, got into a team, really enjoyed playing under my dad. He was a fantastic coach. I learned a lot from him. And then I stepped in foot and went to a different team. And if you like, the coaching from my dad was, I would say, really good. I went to this other junior football team and it was pretty non-existent. It was turn up, play a game, which, kids say they love games. For me, I love training. I love the physicality, the actual drills. And so for me, going into that environment, didn't really understand it, couldn't really get my head around it. So I did that for 2 years, got to 15, 16, and I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to make it as a player. I've started too late. Maybe I'll have a go at this coaching malarkey. My dad does it, he seems to enjoy it. I'll see what that's about. That would have been when I was 15, 16. Stepped in as an assistant manager. And it was all right, it was enjoyable. In charge suddenly, you're presented with 15, 16 kids and you've got to go and deliver a session. And it was quite shocking. It really wasn't probably for me at that time. I can remember my younger brother, he was one of the players, he would have been 12. He must have had a bad game and I think I gave him a bit of criticism. And he just turned around in front of all the players and went, well, what do you know? You're a swimmer. You don't know anything about football. And I thought, I don't know if this is for me. So yeah, took a step back, didn't have any aspirations or anything to be a coach. And then my youngest brother, he was 9 at the time. So they got to the under-9s cup final. So we obviously went along, come for the support. And the coach was, not to criticise him, but he didn't really seem to have any control of, you've got kids running around. It was complete chaos. And my mum said, you've played, you know a bit of drills and stuff. Will you just go along and help him? Absolutely not. No way. And she went, please, he's struggling. This is a cup final. I thought, right, go on then. I'll throw myself in. Went in, did what a warm-up at the time, what I would have thought was coaching. All the classic junior football coach on the sideline shouting and everything. And I thought, I like this. This is actually quite fun. And then just completely changed. So I think at the time I was doing maths, physics, ICT at sixth form. Changed that, went into the sporting routes. I did the BTEC sport, decided, right, I want to go into this coaching route. And that kind of took me from there. Ended up going to Leeds Beckett University, studied sports coaching undergrad. So I had 3 fantastic years up there. Took me in lots of different routes. So by the time coaching volleyball with Volleyball England, a couple of academies. I'm lucky enough to work at Barnsley just as a intern performance analysis, which was great. Lots of different junior football clubs involved with different sports as well, multi-sports, summer camps. Just lots of coaching in different directions, really. And then kind of got to the end of that and thought to myself, right, So what do I actually want to do then now? You know, I'm got to the point where I'm 22. What do I want to achieve, if you like, in my life? And at the time, I'd just finished the dissertation process, really enjoyed that, which not many third years will tell you that they do enjoy that, but I absolutely loved it. Thought, right, I'll study a master's then. So that's kind of where I am today. Second year into a 2-year part-time master's course, again at Leeds Beckett, which is fantastic, really, really enjoyable. You know, when you come in at 20 and you think you know what coaching is, you go to uni and it just completely it explodes your mind, changes your perceptions, your knowledge and everything. And then, you know, I suppose from that, I'm also 3 months into a team called All Centralians. We've just set up a women's team, which I'm lucky enough to be the manager of. Got my younger brother, Ethan, who's also a coach and is my assistant. So we've been doing that for the last 3 months, and that has been really, really enjoyable, different, quite challenging, not what we expected. First time coaching adults for me, but absolutely brilliant. It's such a great experience for us at the minute. And I guess that's kind of taken us, or me and my brother, I say, because it's like our journey together of what we want to achieve. But that's where we're at the minute. And, you know, not afraid to say, but we're looking to try and get ourselves into the professional game with the women at some point. I think the women's sport is just absolutely booming, and it's fantastic to see, especially for football at the minute. So, yeah, I guess a short overview of the journey.
Brilliant, Sam. Well, as always, there's always a few surprises in there for me when I listen to guests tell me about their background. A couple of things. First of all, to go in and be 15, 16 years old and go and coach your younger brother, that must be like one of the hardest coaching positions to be in, for sure. So well done for you and your brother surviving that. Is that the brother you're coaching with now?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, well done. You see, look, you got to react together. So well done to both of you.
Learn from that.
And you made a couple of good points. Well, interesting ones, I think. We both know that there's been a big move around maybe from what was traditional coaching to kind of more games-based.
Yeah.
You know, certainly player-centered coaching, which I principally think that's a good thing, but I mean, you can always debate that. But you made a point about actually there are still kids out there, players, and you sound like one of those, that quite like more drill-based practices. I have them in my team. They actually quite like the technical grooving, drill-based stuff, and they like the games and things, don't get me wrong, but they're okay doing the other stuff too. And I think as coaches, we need to remember that, right?
Absolutely. You know, we're taught, we learn at Leeds Beckett, it's all about understanding the needs and wants of your players. Me personally, you know, I loved games and I loved playing, but I always loved training. And even now as a coach, games are great, it's good if you win, but training for me is, I love it, coaching it, it's fantastic. It's, you know, what I live for in a way. But yeah, you're so right. I think what coaching goes in trends, and the trend at the minute is games-based, fun-based. Everything must represent the game, and that's great and that's fantastic. But there's nothing wrong with that drill-based as well. That gets a lot of criticism, and you know, if players want that and that's what they need, and if that's going to benefit them, then there's nothing wrong with that.
I'm interested to know about the women's football now you're involved in it. Is it an open age adult team, or is it what age group is it you're coaching with the women's?
So it's open age. So the youngest we have is 18. The oldest we have is 56. So
that is proper
very
age,
mixed bag.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's the 56-year-old we've got is an ex-professional. So it's really interesting actually, because when you take a junior football team, or maybe when you take an academy team, if you normally played for a good 5 years minimum, you would expect, depending on what age you've got. But you know, with this women's team, we've got maybe 4 or 5 that have played since they were maybe 5 or 6. We've got a good 5 or 6 players that have never played the game before. We've got maybe 3 or 4 that are maybe 30, 32, 33, not played for 10 years and decided they want to step back into it. So it's such a mixed bag of players, of potential, and I know we're going to get onto this a bit later, Scott, but to create a game model for that has been such an interesting and great challenge to explore. But no, it's really enjoyable, and you know, as I've just said, to me, a job is meeting the needs and the wants of the athletes you're working with. That's the role of a coach for me. So trying to do that for your 56-year-old ex-professional who's got certain expectations, and a player that's never played before, and she don't know what coaching is, and she don't know what football is, and she don't know that turning up and, you know, mucking about in a say training session isn't actually what maybe some of us expect. That's really interesting to try and meet everyone in the middle. So it's good fun, really enjoyable, really challenging as well, but that's what we live for, don't we?
I was going to say a great challenge, right, and a great learning curve. I've just taken on an under-16 ladies team. So I've gone from foundation phase boys football to, you know, more adult ladies football. And it's funny because in some ways they're polar opposites, but in some ways there's a lot of crossover as well. Certainly with regards to some of the key messages and the principles and things. But what I've struggled with a little bit is the starting point, if you like. So like you said, you've got a slightly wider range of ability across the team. Also, you've got some, when you coach foundation phase football, like we don't really worry about too much positions. We just teach the players to play, get on the ball, work hard, make good choices, things like that. Where here you talk to them and no, I'm a right back, or no, I'm a striker, I'm this, and they're very position focused, which I totally understand. It's the age, but they also didn't grow up in an environment either where they were coached to play lots of positions. So they've been a right back since they were probably 6-7 years old. So they've, so when you ask them to actually get on the ball and start beating players and be more expressive and enjoy their football, they look at you like you're gone crazy.
Yeah, and it's funny that because she won't mind me saying this, but the lass we've pulled as captain, she'd always been a centre midfielder, a right midfielder, a striker for the last 10 years. I looked at her and I thought, well, she's unbelievable at winning back possession. She's a great tackler. She reads the game so well defensively. So I pull her at right back. Now, she's a top lass. She didn't, have any, she wouldn't refuse to play there. She was happy to play there for me. But for the first 6 weeks, I got all the players saying, we need to be playing her at midfield. We need to be playing her right wing. I've got the committee telling me, why are we playing her at right back? And I'm going, you wait. And we have this one game where we won, I think it was 6-2. And she was unbelievable at getting forwards, getting back, exactly what we wanted in this game model. And I just look at everyone and they've gone, yeah, okay, he's the gaffer, he knows what he's talking about. And it's funny because you're, like you say, you're challenging someone that's played in a certain position, and you probably know yourself, players these days, they come up to a coach, right, I play, and the coach goes, right, Sam, we'll play you there. What I've always think I've done quite differently is I've always kind of ignored that information, looked at what I think their personal qualities are, maybe. Well, actually, yeah, you are an attacker in a sense, you've played there, but why would I put you there when you're so good and you can be that attacking right wing back for me? And I think that's maybe where, I know we're going to discuss this a bit later, but that's maybe something that I think coaches are kind of doing a bit more now. And it's great to see. I think that's what we should be like.
Definitely. And you're right. I'm sure it'll come from the game models bit. But I guess the difference there is maybe they played a certain way under a certain system or format. And actually, because you've got a different vision of that format, you can see how they might fit in different. They can't see that, but you can. And it needs a bit of time and trust. But you get there. Yeah. All right. Well, let's park it because I'm sure that'll come up in a bit. Before we get on some of the meat around today's conversation, just a bit about kind of your coaching philosophy and principles, just kind of not the game model stuff, more just, your approach to coaching, what's your values, what would a Sam session look like if I was at one of your training sessions?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't say I've never really had one or never really consciously had one into maybe lockdown period where I thought a lot about it. I think about myself as a person. I work hard. I've had that principle instilled in me from my parents. I've worked hard at everything I've done. I'm quite a respectful character. I've always felt I had a good attitude as a player. So for me, in terms of my philosophy and what I want from players in every single session, I have to see working hard 100%. You've got to bring it. I've got to see that respect, not just for me, because I'll earn you respect, but I want you to respect each other. And I like good attitude. So they're probably the three main fundamental principles of my coaching philosophy. But philosophies to me, it's difficult because I think maybe again, just my opinion to say, but I think maybe where some coaches go wrong is they have these non-negotiables, should we say. So maybe they're my non-negotiables, and that might be all right for one context, but maybe when you're going into another one and you're saying, right, respect, attitude, working hard, maybe that doesn't put it for that environment, and maybe you're not going to get that. So I've always kind of said my philosophy from a coaching perspective is kind of just adaptability. And maybe that's just from, my experience at Leeds Beckett being taught that you must understand the needs and wants of your players who you're working with, what's their background, what do they want from you. So, if I'm going into a background where, let's say I'm going into Centralians, I said at the start, if they wanted to just come and mess around, now I wouldn't, because it's difficult for me, but I wouldn't allow that for such, but then I wouldn't be as performance as I am, if you know what I'm saying. I would make it more fun because maybe they were there for more of the social aspect, and maybe that's not what I want, but as my job as a coach, that's what I've got to allow. Although I do always think you can, change that, but I think adaptability. But the other thing I like is I want players to enjoy it. For me as a swimmer, I swam for, like I say, 5 years, full on, 5 to 7 times a week. And I love swimming. I love swimming now, but I never enjoyed it because it was a continuous routine of getting up early, going to the swimming pool, going to school, going to the swimming pool again. You're like a robot. You're going all the time. And I look back at that time and think, I've wasted so much of that 5 years swimming when I could have been doing this, and that, and I never really enjoyed it. So to me, I want players, I don't want it all to be about fun because I think fun comes naturally if you buy into what the session is, but I want them to enjoy it. I don't want them to force them, and that don't matter what age group it is, whether that's with the women now who some of them, they want to play and go for a pint afterwards. You know, if that's with the young kids, maybe under 5s, under 6, under 7s, I want them to enjoy it and learn and develop. So that's probably my coaching philosophy as such. I mean, do you want my playing philosophy as well, or?
Yeah, come on then, Sam. Yes, please. Yeah. How does that align up? What is it? How does it align?
Yeah, I mean, my philosophy is, and I guess we're probably going to chat about this just a bit later, but I'm a massive fan of Ajax. Most of my experience with Centralians now, it's always been in youth development. When I was 18, I was the assistant manager of a junior football team called Drakehouse Dragons. I was working under a manager and another coach who was same age as me, but he'd been a footballer all his life, if you like. And they were obsessed with playing a player in one specific position, like we were just saying, throughout. And I could never understand that. Why would we play them in one position throughout their youth development? That to me, that doesn't make sense. So I've always liked the idea of training and playing players in different positions. But as I got into the master's course and began to understand this crazy world of decision making, which is very complex and such, if we just play a player in one position their whole career, then they only really experience the cues, the positional specific information in that one position. So the problem is, I always think about the 2014 World Cup. I don't know if you remember Spain won, Netherlands 5. And I think it was, I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the defenders went through on goal, skies it over the goal. And I remember Rio Ferdinand saying, he's not scored that because he doesn't have that information. He's never been in that situation before. He doesn't understand what to do in that given moment. And from a decision-making point of view, it's dead on. If we train players in every single position like Ajax do, you look at De Ligt, who's now at Juventus, unbelievable up top. He can head the ball because he's learned to play that position. Frenkie de Jong, Barcelona, Ajax do playing him at the back, and you think, what are you playing him at back for? But because he understands that he can make a decision in every single part of the pitch. So from a playing philosophy, I really like that for youth development. But, I've adapted that as well with Centralians. I like to play attacking football. I like to play possession-based football. I can't stand long ball. I hate it. Cannot stand it. I don't think it is a good thing to watch. And maybe that comes from me being a Sheffield Wednesday fan for years. I'd come to football, that's what I'd see. It forward, knock it off, try and have a shot. To me, that's just boring. I want to entertain, not just the players, because the players enjoyed things, but I want to entertain anyone watching my teams. Wow, what great football. Possession-based, attacking, always playing forwards. But again, that rotation of positions for me is key. And even now with the women, someone said to me the other day, why are you bothered about rotating them when the 19, 20, 21, 22, even the 30-year-olds? Yeah, but they can still improve. And that rotation of positions from, an opposition perspective, it confuses the hell out of them, really, that you're suddenly all swapping. They don't know what to do, but it improves them as players. And that's really what I'm about. I want to win. I like to win, but I like improving players as well. So I guess that might be where that bit of improvement and the rotation comes in, again, with the coaching philosophy of what are you there for and what do the players want? If you're in a youth development setting, is playing a player in one position the whole time beneficial to them? Not really. I'm not saying the goalkeeper, I'm saying you have to play him as a goalkeeper. That's a bit different. But if it's a striker, why can't we play him at CAM? Why can't we play him as wingers? Why can't we play him as a wing back or centre back or centre midfield? Because it will benefit their progression as a player. So I guess that's probably where they're tying together, really.
And I guess if your game model is one where you want to kind of play an expansive possession-based attacking style of football, well, one of the best ways of doing it is having versatile players, right, that can adapt in the moments of the game. So, I mean, the two marry up, don't they? It'd be hard to have that style of football, that approach, if you haven't got players that are willing to kind of do different jobs in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I can remember being with that Drakehouse Dragons team and a player coming up and his dad coming up and saying, he's a winger. He only ever plays left wing. And I can remember thinking, you're 10 years old. A player where I think we should play. We'll play you all over the, and he's like, oh no, he's a winger and he'll have to play that position forever because he's going to get into Sheffield United's academy. Yeah, but it will benefit. And again, this is where I think perception of coaching is changing now, and maybe that's changing. But back then, as an 18-year-old, I couldn't understand it. Why would we play him in one position? To me, it limits him, if anything. But the perception at that time was that makes him a better player. But, maybe I was ahead of my time. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, on that point, I think if we get a chance, we'll talk about your blog about the Ajax philosophy. But I remember reading something, and this was many years ago, I read it, and it was to do with Dennis Bergkamp and when he was at Ajax Academy. Yeah. And currently, you might know better than me, Sam, but I'm pretty sure the story was something like this, where he was a left winger at Ajax, and either he asked or they played him for a whole season as right back, so he could become a more effective left winger. So and they said, look, if you don't know how a right back thinks, moves, and works, you won't be as good as you can be a left winger. And he credits a lot of his football and his growth down to that experience. I know he wasn't the only one that got that opportunity. And I mean, you're talking probably, I'm going to guess that was probably early 90s, maybe even late 80s. I don't know how long ago that was. So some teams have been doing this kind of stuff for a while, and maybe we are still playing catch up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so like, I think, and again, I always drone on about coaching perceptions. Anyone that listens to my podcast, I drone on about it all the time. But, particularly in football, there was always that perception of just, you get so much limited time with players, especially in a junior football environment. So you just play them in that one position. Yeah, but that really limits them. You're talking about Dennis Bergkamp there. Like you say, he's played that right back position. He knows what any right back he's coming up against is thinking. He knows the decisions they're going to make, and he knows how to exploit them. And better yet, you think about, if you're, I don't know, let me give you an example. I think about Chelsea, Barcelona 2012, that semi-final, when Chelsea just purely defended for 90 minutes. Now, if you've got Bergkamp in your team who's played right back before, well, he knows he's a better defender than maybe having your Fernando Torres up top who's just trying to dangle a leg out. It improves them technically, it improves them tactically, against your game model or however you want to play. It makes them an all-rounded player as such, and that's what I really believe in, creating an all-rounded player. Not so much with a goalkeeper. I think goalkeeper is position specific. That would be the exception. But yeah, all-rounded players for me is so important, especially in youth development.
So you mentioned it then, Sam, but can you tell us about your podcast, the Sports Coaching Podcast? I'm going to fess up straight away and say I've listened to a lot of the episodes. I think it's excellent. I love it. Particularly, I listened to one recently. Is it David Baird? I want to get his name right. Talking about scoreboard soccer.
Yeah,
which was honestly, and it's funny because I think you get to a stage you've done this for a while. You think you kind of almost heard everything a little bit, and you're waiting for the next new idea and something. And then something like that one where you discussed with David was just like such a simple concept, and it was so much good stuff in there that it was brilliant. There's many more as well as that one, but yeah, tell us a bit about how it came about and. And what's your kind of philosophy around the podcast and what's your hope with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, to give you a bit of a backstory, I suppose this time last year, I just started working for a private football academy. I'll not mention the name, and great company, do some great stuff, but the perception of coaching was players come in, you provide a lot of feedback, a lot of instruction. You must demonstrate that player improves at something within that session. And for me, coming from now the master's background, but at the time I'd just finished third year, if you like, that was completely against everything I'd been taught for 3 years. You think about learning, people assume that learning is that when a player suddenly improves how to pass within that session, yeah, they've improved, but will they replicate that in the game? Probably not, because that's not what learning is. Learning isn't linear, it's non-linear. And one of the first things I learned at uni was when I was 18, 19, before I actually went to uni, a lot of instruction. I used to give feedback all the time. I was one of the coaches on the sidelines, if you like. I was always talking to the players. And I can remember reading this paper. I think it was by an author called Chris Janelle. And he talks around, feedback's great. But the problem is if you're providing feedback all the time, the player becomes dependent on that. And as soon as you take that feedback away, well, they don't know what to do because you're making that decision for them and you are basically creating robots. So that's something that really stuck with me. So, anyway, going back to this private football academy, I was being told to coach in a way that, years prior, it would have been fine. I would have done it. But when you get on a master's degree, you then begin to have philosophies about what you think coaching is. For me, I think the best coaching sometimes is you just stood there not saying anything. Bit of praise, well done there. and let the players figure it out themselves. And people, assume in this country that isn't coaching, they believe that you stood there and you're being lazy. And that's what I was told at the time. But I wasn't, I felt that was at the time in a youth development setting. I don't need to talk to them all the time because I'm going to benefit these players. They might not see progression within this session, but I guarantee you over time, you will see that progression. But anyway, so eventually I had to leave because I just couldn't coach in that way. It was going against everything I believed in. And, during the lockdown period, I thought to myself, I just wish there was something that when I was trying to explain all this academic stuff to the head coach or my boss at the time, I just wish there was something that he could listen to and go, oh, that makes a bit of sense. And maybe from someone who's got a bigger name than me, a professional coach or whatever, a lecturer who can explain that maybe better than what I was trying to explain at the time. So I thought to myself, right, I'll just create a podcast then. And the whole idea is, and it's trying to give people that maybe haven't been to uni or haven't gone into that academic route, and that's not me saying we're better than them or anything like that, but giving them a small insight on some of the theories and concepts that we explore, and why you might see someone from uni coaching differently to that common perception in England of feedback instruction all the time, And if you're a parent and you see a coach not doing that, then that might be why this episode of the Sports Coaching Podcast. So that was the whole idea, really. It took off a lot more than I expected. At first, it was just getting a couple of people I knew from the master's course or a couple of lecturers, but now we're starting to get, people everywhere across. And it's brilliant. You mentioned David there talking about scoreboard soccer. The best thing about it for me is I sit here and I just think that is fantastic. And I learn so much in every single episode. So it develops me as well as a coach. But that's the whole idea, just giving an insight or a snippet into just different ideas of coaching. And, the hope is that the listeners, if it's a coach, if it's a player, if it's a teacher, a parent, they've gone away and thought, that makes a bit of sense. Now I can maybe understand why this coach is doing this, or maybe in that next session I'm not going to give as much feedback because if I give that feedback, it might stop them from making their own decisions. That's the whole idea, really. And I like to think it's working. Seems to be doing all right.
Well, from my point of view, Sam, it definitely is, because it is all about getting us thinking and learning. And it's excellent when you see other resources you can tap into that just keeps the conversation going. Because we can always improve, can't we? There's always new concepts and ideas out there. You position the podcast really well. And if you hadn't said it yourself, I was going to say that. Look, to me, it's a bit of a link between some of the more kind of academic stuff that can be a bit too far for some of us, like practitioners. You get it across really nicely in different ways with different guests and different concepts. And I think it's excellent. I certainly learn lots from it, and I enjoy listening to the episode. So well done, and keep it up. You make a couple of good points there again. I think the danger of immediate feedback is funny because I never really thought about it. You kind of do. I agree with what you're saying, but actually maybe immediate feedback is a bit more dangerous than we think it is. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be used at all, but we should probably use it quite carefully. And I've never thought about this until you mentioned it. But do you think it's fair to say that then, that actually we've got to be a bit careful how we use that immediate feedback, whether that's in a coaching session or in a match?
Yeah, I don't think coaches realise the power they have when they say something in a game. So, I think about when I was 18 as this assistant coach, my job was the defence. So I would always watch the defence, and I can remember the left back. I can't remember his name, but I would tell him where to go all the time. And he was brilliant. He was a great left back. And I can remember one game I wasn't there, and the feedback from the manager was awful. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't make any decisions. He had an awful game. Never understood why. And I can remember that next game, it was like a sponsored silence event. I don't know if they still do it, but so basically only the manager could talk. And I watched him, and he just could not do anything himself. And he was looking at me all the time. He was waiting for me to do this with my hand, where to position himself, or what to do in this moment, or what to do in that moment. And, at the time, I didn't really think anything of it, to be honest. But when I did read that paper about Christian L, it made me think, right, that makes a lot of sense. And, at the end of the day, I say this to my players now because they expect that from me as well. And it's took a good 2 or 3 months to try and explain why I'm not an instruction-based coach. But to me, the player has to make that decision themselves. They can't be reliant on me to make the decision. They have to make that decision. And, the other point of view is, if you're a coach, you're on the sideline, your perception of the game is completely different to the players in that game. So, I might see one thing, the players might see something completely different. So, to me, I mean, I say it to my players all the time. You make your own decision. If you think it's right, go for it, %. But, just going back to the whole instruction thing, you have to be careful, I think, how much instruction you give, because don't get me wrong, instruction is good and you need instruction, and sometimes a player will need instruction, tell them where they've gone wrong or what they need to do or what they need to do there. But I think you have to be careful, one, how much information you give, because that could actually limit your player. Technical instruction is something I don't really agree with, because to me, why do we have to teach players to play a pass in a certain way? Why can't they play it however they want? And if we do teach them to play in a certain way, is that not actually limiting the solution they could perform in a particular moment of the game? But if you think about just from a tactics point of view, again, are you developing that player if all 11 players are looking at you to make that decision in the game? So for me, I think instruction is good. I think we need it, but I think coaches need to think about how much instruction, again, particularly in youth development, how much they actually provide to that player. Because if you think about what is youth development, well, it's to develop the young players you've got. So if you're giving them feedback all the time and then eventually they go into, let's say, Chelsea's academy, for example, well, are they going to perform as well as they did for you? Because now they've got a new coach who isn't going to give them that feedback. And now maybe they can't make that decision. And is that why for years at England we struggled to have so many players coming through? I don't know. But to me, instruction is a good thing, but you just have to think about how much you're giving and what's the effect on that player, short-term and long-term.
Yes, it's as much as is needed, but as little as possible, right?
Yeah, summed it up perfectly there.
So that brings on nicely then, because in addition to the podcast you've got out, you also write some absolutely wonderful blogs. Again, I think the style of the writing is certainly up there for me, and probably my limit academically. But you just about keep me in there most of the time. It gets me stretching my brain cells. But you've written a few, and if you don't mind, Sam, I don't want to do this any injustice because people need to read them basically. But I'd like to touch on just a few of them and have a little bit of a summary, maybe in what you learned from doing the blog, and maybe or just some of the highlights or the key messages from some of the blogs you've done. And I thought the first one, if you didn't mind, would be the one you did on creating a game model.
Yeah, absolutely. So that came about from, they seem very trendy at the minute, game models. They seem all over Twitter. You've probably seen them yourself. I didn't think that, and again, not to criticize, but I didn't think that maybe people didn't have the right understanding of what a game model is for. Why is it there? So to me, and again, I should say this is what we've been taught on the master's course, and this is maybe 5 years of academic teachings. But to me, the whole idea of a game model is it's the decision that you want the player to make in each moment of the game. And that eventually is going to represent your playing philosophy. So, if I give you an example, when we are in possession, one of the principles for me, so in possession, that would be in the attacking phase. One of the principles is always play forwards. If we can't play forwards, play sideways. If we can't play sideways, play backwards. That represents the Ajax playing philosophy of always playing the ball forwards, always on the attacking foot. So, the whole game model to me is you have these principles in each moment of the game. So, you've got attack, defensive transition, defense, attacking transition. Within that, there are 2 sub-principles. And again, this is just my model. So, to give an example, in attack, we either attempt to score or we maintain possession. So, we at uni, we term that a performance problem. So the way you have to start these game models is if you were taking an under-5s team, or let's say you were taking an under-20 team of, 20-year-old footballers, but they've never played the game. They've never played the game, and you've got to explain this game to them in the simplest form. So, the first question they would ask you is, right, so in attack, we either maintain possession or attempt to score. Well, how do we maintain possession? Or how do we attempt to score? And then that adds your principles. So, for me, I want you to maintain possession by getting into a diamond or getting into a triangle. And essentially what it's there for then is that is the decision you want your player to make in that game. And then and this probably comes in a bit to tactical periodization, but then that should really base your whole training program, your training session. So if you want your players to maintain possession by getting into diamonds and triangles, then your training session has to be diamonds and triangles, but it has to exactly be that principle. And that sounds quite simple. That sounds quite obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me for the last 7 years. And I don't think it's obvious to quite a lot of people. But that's the whole idea in a brief structure to me of what a game model is. I think a lot of people have a game model and it, represents maybe an idea they want to do. But, a game model's pointless if you are not working on those principles in the training session throughout the 12-month period or however long you're within that club. To me, that is why you would have a game model in place.
That's a great job, Sam, in condensing that wonderful piece of work down to a couple of minutes summary. So well done. Even I kept up with that one. And I did do something. So you're right, it's very trendy and stuff. I remember doing a podcast a year or so back about game models, and I probably wasn't really in a position, maybe 18 months ago, I probably wasn't really in a position to really understand it. And I've evolved slightly on my understanding then. And having had a go at doing one over lockdown as well, what I found out about looking at this was two things. One, it really clears your mind as to kind of how you see the game. And second of all, then, and probably more importantly, it can really help you focus your training sessions then, because actually you know now what you want to work on. And you're right, and it's more principles than it is maybe practices. So what changed for me was not necessarily the environment or how we would set up a training session, but I wouldn't worry too much about technical detail as much as a pass or a finish or a run. I would focus on the principle we're trying to achieve. You know, so if it is maintaining possession or finding space or closing space, depending on what we're doing, then that's what we're doing there. And there's technical points in that, don't get me wrong, and they need to be looked at and supported with the players. But my focus was the principles rather than the actual technical elements. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that I'm a particularly good coach, but I wonder if we are moving to more of a principle-based coaching style as opposed to a technical one, and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree with what you say there. You know, about 3 years ago, I took over a team called Kirkstall. I wanted to play possession-based football, but the problem is at that time, I didn't know what a game model was. I didn't understand it. So all we ever did was small-sided games, and it might have been 2-touch or 1-touch, encouraging them to pass the ball. And that was great. We get into the game, all they do is keep possession. They don't look to score. All the time, just pass. To me, you know, the game model it represents your philosophy. It basically tells you how you're going to achieve that philosophy, you know, once you've figured it out. But, you know, you're so right there. And I think this is probably where we've been behind Portugal and maybe where we've been behind Holland for maybe the last 20 or 30 years. And maybe now I think the success of the England team is because these game models have come in place. What we tend to do as coaches is we go, and again, I've done this for years myself, is right, I want you to go and maintain possession. That's how we're going to play. Go and do it. But players, and you know, it's difficult to say, but players can only do so much. If you want a player to maintain possession by playing in diamonds, you must work on that in training for countless times, because players will reproduce what they do in training sessions. You know, it's like, I can remember working under a manager and we'd just do shooting practice all the time. It would be, you've seen it yourself, typical Sunday league drill. Manager's here, players are there, they play the ball into the manager, touch, go and score. And then the manager expects them to score 3 or 4 goals in a game. It doesn't work like that. You have to work on what is the principle for you to score. And, you know, whereabouts on the pitch is that in the attacking third, midfield? You know, because if it's in that attacking third in that area, you have to work on that. You know, I'll give the example of Cristiano Ronaldo. You know, he scored that fantastic overhead kick against Bayern Munich. Was it Bayern Munich? No, it was Juventus, wasn't it? He'll have worked on that in that exact position, in that exact moment, probably with the same number of defenders, and he's just reproduced it in the game. And again, this sounds so simple and it sounds so obvious, but it wasn't obvious for years. And again, and I think you know, what you're just saying there about technical practice, I think that's kind of going out of the game now. I think for years, again, I would do, we call it block practice. So repetition of maybe getting into pairs and side foot passing. Well, that's great, but then you can't expect your players to maintain possession from that, because as daft as it sounds, you've not taught them to maintain possession. You've just taught them to pass a ball. So in their players' mind, even if they're 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 years old, they still don't know how to maintain possession because you've just taught them how to pass a ball. They don't know about diamonds or triangles or movement or positions or any of that because you've not taught them. And that's where you as a coach have to go, right, and look at yourself and think about what your practice is actually doing in the game. And, you know, I guess this probably goes on to a bit of tactical periodization, but, you know, in Portugal, what they argue is, why do you spend any time doing the technical if you're doing the tactical, if you're maintaining possession? Well, so, and I think England now, if you look at the national team, you've probably seen that England DNA, it's again very popular. I think they've realised that and they've gone, okay, that makes a lot of sense now. Now we're not going to be telling our coaches to do the technical side foot passing what I was on my level 1, 6 years ago. Now it's right, tactical focus, and all that will come through. But here's our game model. Here's how we want to play, And if you're a coach and you don't really have a game model in place, take next.
And I guess it's that transference, isn't it? It's doing things in practice that's actually going to support the players in the reality of the game. And that brings us nice end to that tactical periodization, which you touched on just then, and another blog that you've written on it. So if you don't mind, again, just for me and for the listeners, if you can recall what you've written, I'm sure you can, just the summary around that and how it links in. I guess it does link in from the game model and that transference.
It does very well, actually. Yeah. So the whole idea of it, and, this is what Mourinho's done for years. This is what Villas-Boas will have done. This is what probably Nuno at Wolves is doing now. What we do in this country is, and I guess the traditional football approach is that players come in for pre-season, and for 2 or 3 weeks, what do they do? Fitness drills. They don't touch a ball, and maybe I'm being a bit prehistoric here. This might have been 5 years ago. It might have changed now. I'm not too sure, but that was the traditional. That's what I experienced as a young player. First 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, fitness. Tactical periodization, in that framework, that's just stupid. You are wasting your time. If you think about a junior football context, how many times do you get them a week? Maybe twice. You might get them a Tuesday, you might get them a Saturday morning, then you've got a game Sunday. So tactical periodization argues that everything comes from the tactical. So if let's say your tactical principle is, I want to get into zone 14 to score. For those that don't know, zone 14 is like just behind the goal area in the, if you're attacking. So let's say that's your tactical principle and you're working on that in training. Well, you're going to be working on shooting. You're going to be working on heading. You're going to be working on chesting, maybe kneeing, all these ways to score, because that will naturally come from that tactical element. From a social point of view, you'll be working on communication. You'll be working on teamwork, because you've got to communicate to get that ball into that specific area to score. From a psychological point of view, you might be working on confidence to, try and score in different technical ways. You might be working on leadership, shouting for the ball. Maybe you're the captain. And then physical again comes in, because let's say again, you're getting into zone 14 to maybe head a ball to score. Well, you're running or you're sprinting. So the whole idea of tactical periodization would argue that, why are you coaches in England, what I think one famously said, why are you wasting 4 or 5 weeks doing fitness? Because if you just do the tactical and you're doing small-sided games that might be, again, in diamonds or triangles, well, what are you doing in that? You're working hard. So the fitness comes through. One of my players, the left back, she's played for 10 years. Dad comes up to me last week and he goes, I've never seen her so fit. I've never seen her run so much. She's so quick. He says, what have you been doing? I said, we've just been doing the game. We've just been working on we've not done any technical, no fitness, none of that. Everything we've done is represented the game in some form. And that's what it's all about, really. So then when it comes onto this game model, well, again, if you're in a junior football context and you're only seeing them twice a week, well, if I've got 3 months to the start of that season and I want them to be playing like Ajax, well, I've got to spend every single session doing my game model, because those 5 weeks of physical fitness, it might make them fitter. But then when we get to that first game, how did he play? What did he do? And that's where in my opinion, that's where the problem comes. Whereas if you've spent 5 weeks on that game model, okay, they might not be as fit. I would argue that they would be, but they've got 5 weeks understanding of that tactical game. Within every tactical element, there's a technical element. So they'll have worked technical stuff as well. They'll have worked on the physical. They'll have worked on psychological, and they'll have worked on the social aspect. And that really is the whole idea of why you would introduce it. So I always, and I don't mean it arrogant when I say this, and I think some people do, but I say it's just smarter coaching. It's looking at how much time have you got, how much time have I got? Okay, I've got to get them playing in this certain way in 6 weeks. Everything has to be tactical. And if you listen to John Terry, he talks about when Mourinho first come in, I think it's on Sky Sports, with Jamie Carragher and David Jones presented. It must have been about 4 or 5 years ago. And they said to him, so what happened when he first come in? Balls from day one. small-sided games, balls from day one. And he said at that time that was unheard of. And no one could understand why you do it. At that time, everyone would spend 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks doing physical fitness. But he said as soon as we got to the start of the season, we were ahead by every other team because we'd always done the tactical and everything else had filtered through. So, that is the whole idea of it, really, if that makes sense. It's a bit more detail in the blog, so I'd encourage you listening to go and read it.
Definitely, really, but a very good summary again, Sam. And I think if you've got players, whether you've got them every day like you'll have if you're working professionals, or whether you've got them once or twice a week if you're working at a lower level or whatever it might be, the trick is to try and be as effective as you can with the coaching time that you've got, right? And
absolutely, yeah.
You were talking then, and one game that came to mind, I don't even know why, but I just thought of the England-Croatia game. Do you remember the World Cup semi-final a few years back? And I just thought, that England lost the game there on fitness, but not because they're less fit. They just weren't as game fit as Croatia were, and I think actually learning to play the game smartly can actually maximise your energy levels because you're not wasting energy doing the wrong stuff. So linking in the training and the fitness with playing the game, it's got to be a win-win in many ways. And that game was an example of maybe where we weren't quite as clever as them at that time, and how you can pay the price for it.
Absolutely, and it's like, it sounds ridiculous because you would think, why would me spending, doing a suicide drill sprinting, why would that not be more beneficial to the players? But, if you've got a player actually running from the halfway line to get into the box to score a goal, well, they're utilising subconsciously the sprinting more effectively because they're learning how to sprint in that situation, which again, sounds ridiculous. But don't they all sprint the same? Well, actually they don't, because it's seeing the ball, it's getting into the position, and it's heading it, and you have to sprint quite differently, or you need to jump quite differently. And again, it sounds, when this all understood, it took me years to understand all this, a good 4 or 5 years on the university course. But it sounds so simple, and it makes so much sense, but it isn't. It's not simple I don't think it's simple to a lot of us in England, but in Portugal, in Holland, this is what they've been doing for the last 30 years, and probably represents, okay, the national teams aren't doing too well, but probably represents the quality of the coaching that maybe why Mourinho was so successful, because again, he was probably ahead of his time in that. And I think you look at Premier League managers now, that pre-season for most of them has probably gone out of the window because it's not beneficial. What
about the FA Four Corner model then, Sam? Do you think it's something that helps with this, or does it hinder this?
That's a really good question, actually, Scott. I think, so I would say we shouldn't be too reliant on tactical periodization, and they would tell me that that's ridiculous. But in my opinion, you should still look to work on that within sessions. So let's say communication. They would argue communication will just come naturally when you're doing the tactical, because players will have to talk to each other to figure it out. Yeah, it probably does, but not for the last that's really quiet and has been shy for 15 years. So then to me, rather than doing a team bonding session outside of football, what I would look to do is maybe adding a little, what we'd call a constraint or a rule where maybe only that player can talk. So you're still working on the tactical, but you're using that bit of communication. Well, you've added something in. Tactical periodization doesn't always suggest that, but that's what I would suggest from my own opinion. So going to the 4 corner model, I think it's important to consider that. I think it's a very good framework to use, but rather than saying, right, today we're just going to work on technical, or today we're just going to work on psychological, I would use that of, right, still the tactical, but what's the technical as well? So let's say you've got 2 players that are struggling on side foot passing. So we'll add a rule in that is going to make them pass a bit more within that technical drill. Within that tactical drill. So it's still the tactical focus, but you're being aware of what your players need in these corners and maybe just adding a couple of rules. So, one player communicating that's a popular one. If you've got a player who's struggling with ball control, maybe you'll make him the floater or make her the floater so she's receiving more of the ball. These are little rules that you can add in that tick the box, if you like, for the 4 corner, but it's still following the tactical aspect. So it's still, again, that smarter coaching. Not to sound arrogant, but that's how I would probably look at it. So yeah, I do think it's beneficial. I think it's how we use it. Again, when I did the FA Level 1, it was pick a corner or pick tactical or technical. Now I would always pick the tactical and just let those others think about how I'm going to introduce them and see if they can come through.
Brilliant, Sam. Now, you've got others. I want to cover one more if that's okay, because just for time reasons. The play versus practice blog you wrote. Now, I think you probably covered some of this stuff in what you've said already, but again, just if you can, just summarize that blog and some of the key learnings that you've kind of put across in there that people would need to read, but before they read it, what they're going to find out when they do read it.
Yeah. So basically, this all comes from it's a massive argument in sports coaching academia. So several authors argue that you have to do 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to be a professional in anything. But the sort of hindrance in that is it comes from learning to play a piano or a guitar or any musical instrument. So the idea in music is if you spend 10,000 hours learning to play a piano, you will be an expert. So some practitioners, some researchers believe that transfers into sport. So they would suggest that Lionel Messi or Ronaldo have spent 10,000 hours in their youth within a setting that has allowed them to become an expert. Other researchers and practitioners turn around and say that's ridiculous. Actually that is more of a hindrance. So, and again, it's quite a difficult one. I probably fit in between. I think that, and again, just from my own experience from playing and coaching, in England, what we tend to do is we go, right, this is for example, if we're teaching a technical skill, so let's say we're teaching them how to perform a side foot pass, right? This is the technical framework that's within this book. It says that you should pass like this, 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 and this. You go and do that, and you can only pass like that. Now, the problem is that you're then taking away what we would call, a bit of an academic term, but they call it perceptual motor adaptability. So when you're in a game or whatever sport you play, you've got all this information around you. All right. So if you've got a ball coming towards you, you've got information about its flight, its speed, all that sort of stuff. And then you will make a decision how you're going to touch that ball down. So, if we think about again to passing, if you've just taught a player to play a side foot pass in one specific way, well, if that solution doesn't cut it in a certain situation, they can't do it. So they can't pass. If the side foot pass doesn't cut it, they can't make that pass. Whereas, if you've not done that and you've kind of said, pass however you want, then there's more chance that in certain situations, all right, so a side foot pass doesn't cut it here, but maybe an outside of the foot pass does. And I can do that. I can perform that skill. So, going back to this play versus practice is all about you are within a football academy, you're there 5 times a week, and you are learning technical, tactical skills. You perform that for 10 years, you're going to make it as a professional player. Play is about, no, that's ridiculous. Go into a park, go with your friends, spend 10 years playing that. Then maybe when you get to 13 or 14, then come into an academy, refine your skills, then you'll be a better player. And I think if you probably look at the best players in world football, so, if you think about, I'm just trying to think one that comes to mind, maybe Thiago Alcantara, who's now just gone to Liverpool. What a player. But he comes up with different solutions in different moments of the game. So solutions, I mean, different ways to pass the ball. Brilliant. But maybe if you put that against, I don't know, let's maybe think about, I'm struggling a name, I don't want to undermine any top footballers, but let's think about a typical English footballer who's maybe only just passed the ball as in a side foot or long ball and clipped it forwards. Well, that's great if you're playing long ball, or that's great for certain situations, but for others, he'll fail because he doesn't have that, and we call it like a repertoire of skills he can produce. So, in my opinion, it's about what you're doing. I don't think there's a problem with deliberate practice, but what is the practice you're doing? So if you're turning around to players and going, right, you can only do a side foot pass like this. You can only do a long range pass like this. You can only shoot in this way. You can only head the ball in this way. I think you limit players. In the terms of the funny environment, that's suggesting because there's no coaching there, figure out how to do it themselves, and they've got so much in their repertoire to perform it. So, I'll give you an example. There's a lass called Shaz, plays for Centralians for us. Never played before, never been coached, never played for a team. Unbelievable technical player. She's unbelievable. One of the best players I've ever seen. Why? Because she's never played. All she's done is she's a street footballer. She's gone to the park, she's explored, she's experimented. So, when she plays, she comes up with these solutions, and no one's ever seen it before. And, you've got all the committee and you've got all the players watching. Well, she's never played before. How can she be that good? Because we've not constrained her by saying, no, you can't do that fantastic turn because that might lose us possession. Instead, you've just got to lay it off and run. That, to me, is the whole where this would come from. But, yeah, So to me, it depends. So you've got practice that says you must be in an academy for 10 years. You've got player that says, no, just come in when you're 13, 14. To me, it doesn't really matter. It's more about what are they doing within that environment. So if you're, I would say, constraining players and saying, sorry, that's my dog. I apologise for the barking for the listeners. But if you're constraining players, I know, nightmare, postman wants to come. But yeah, so if you're constraining players and saying, right, you can only pass in one certain way, I think you limit the player. And again, going back to what we were saying earlier about Ajax, the all-rounded player, why would you do that? Why not just let them come up with their own solution? And, you know, if they're playing outside of the foot pass all the time, is there anything wrong with that? You know, actually, we admire it now, but we didn't 10 years ago, but we do now. So that's the whole idea, really. I don't think there's a right or wrong. Like I say, it's a hot debated topic in academia. You've got people, you know, seriously going at each other about no, play is right, no, practice is right. I don't think there's anything wrong, personally. I just think it's how you utilise that practice, if that makes sense.
There is a danger, isn't there, of over-coaching and being too prescriptive. And I do wonder sometimes when I see grassroots coaching environments, and in most cases, I do genuinely believe that the intentions of those involved are good intentions. However, I do also tangibly see that the outcomes or the process or the environment that these kids are in, I would question whether or not they wouldn't be better, some of these kids, just playing with their mates in the park. You know, and I'm not having a go at anybody here. Even sometimes looking at my own practices and stuff like that, they might have been better off just going down the park and having all the rough and tumble and the arguments and the fending for themselves and arguing over the hoop, whether it was the post or the crossbar because they haven't got actual goals, you know, and the flat balls and stuff. And I think if we're going to step as adults into coaching children in whatever environment, we have to try and make sure that the bar we're setting is beyond what they could have done themselves in their own space. Do you know? And I think that play versus practice is something we should consider as coaches, because actually it's okay giving some advice and creating an environment in which you can hopefully improve things. But if it's at the expense where actually the overall outcomes are probably less than what they would have got just doing their own thing, then you've got to question why you're doing it, right?
100%. And again, this goes back to coaching perception, Scott. There's a perception in this country that, he's not performing that side foot pass exactly right, so let me go and change that. Let me give the instruction and feedback and make him perform it like everyone else. That's a perception of coaching. But really, in my opinion, you limit the player, because then all that player will ever do throughout his career or her career is play a pass in that certain way. And then when you think about decision making in a game, well, if that pass doesn't cut it, they can't make the decision, that might lose you a goal. You know, it's all about what is the best for youth development. You're 100% right. He's like, you know, I go back to Shaz. Unbelievable player. You know, ball comes, she just takes it down with her foot. I've never seen anything like it. But if she'd have played for 10 years in a youth academy, would they have stopped that? Maybe. And maybe then she wouldn't be able to do that. And that's why she stands out, because she can just create a solution out of nothing. Whereas the other players, because they've been constrained, potentially, maybe they can't. And you're right. And I think it's just about us as coaches realising that, again, I hate technical frameworks. I don't understand why we're brought up as coaches to go, right, this is how everyone they must perform this pass exactly the same. We're all different shapes and sizes. We've all got different physical features. Why do we all have to pass the ball the same? To me, that doesn't make any sense to me. It just limits the player, you know. And I think as a coach, and I'd say this to anyone listening, is there anything wrong with that? They've performed that pass slightly differently. Maybe the body is quite, you know, maybe they pass it and the shoulder goes, and it's just a bit different to this framework. But is it wrong? Does it perform the solution what we want? Yeah, it's a successful pass, so it's fine, in my opinion. But, you know, as a coach, it's just about having that belief to go, no, I don't need to stop them there. And if a parent wants to come up and ask me, I'll explain why. Very difficult to do, though, because as you know yourself, parents, coaches, you know, they'll tell you to do it in a specific way, and sometimes it's difficult to turn away from that, and, you know, it might lead you to losing your job. But, you know, to me, you have to just look and think, but do I need to? That's the perception, but is that right?
It wasn't too long ago when I was hearing coaches shouting at players for using their toes to pump the ball, like the toe pumps. Until Ronaldo did it a couple of times and scored some wonderful goals. Now suddenly people are, you know, they're actually coaching it now. And I think this is the point, isn't it? You're going to take away the ability to be creative.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Scott.
No, I just think that's an illustration of kind of sometimes we haven't got all the answers. We don't need all the answers. That's not our job to have all the answers. It's to create the environment which the players can find their own answers.
Yeah, and I think, just as a finishing point to that, people always have said Brazil are so creative. Why can't we have creation like Brazil? Why can't we have all this samba football? Well, the reason that they've been so good, you're so right, it's as if, now it's suddenly a trend almost in England to be creative. And, I can remember doing it myself, Scott, turning around to the player and saying, no, don't toe pong it. We don't want to see that. That's not what football is. Why? If it scores, if it gets us a goal, is there anything wrong with that? And again, again, it's just how perceptions change. You see footballers now. So, excuse me, it's just how that perception is, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, look, the blogs are excellent, Sam, and I do encourage people to read. You've done a cracking job there of summarising 3 of them, and there's others out there. But we'll share your Twitter handle because I know they're on there as well in the show notes of this episode, and the podcast itself. They've got to listen to episodes there because there's some brilliant stuff that covers all kinds of topics. I'm interested to know from your point of view, do you have a favourite session or practice? If you had to do a session this evening for 15 kids or adults and you had little time to prepare, what would be the one you'd pull out your pocket to kind of put on that you think, actually, I know this one always kind of works?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm a big fan of being in possession. I like possession football and I love diamonds and triangles. But what I always believe in, and I suppose this is going back to your point, what you were mentioning earlier, just about instruction, is that if we are, so I've done it myself quite recently. If I instruct a player and give them the answer what to do, they probably don't recall that information. I think it was maybe the second or third session we got in. We call it implicit learning. So basically, you are hammering a concept into your players, but they're just not aware to it. They don't understand what it's about. So the practice was we got them in, everything we did was about diamonds. So we got them into a diamond and they were passing the ball to each other. Then they were passing the ball and moving. Then we got them into a possession game. And automatically in that possession game at the end, they're in diamonds and triangles. They didn't even know they were doing it. But because they'd worked on it in that session and the information had been fed to them, still fed to their brain subconsciously, they're suddenly in a diamond and triangle session. So I think for me, I really like this idea of implicit learning. It's very limited instruction, but I'm just trying to think what the word is. It's kind of like the concept is behind, but they don't. So they thought that session was about passing. They thought it was about everything was short range passing. Well, it was from a technical viewpoint, but behind the lines, if you like, what they didn't realize was it was about diamonds and triangles. And that's what they implemented in the game. So a favourite session for me would always be diamonds and triangles because I just think that's such a brilliant concept and something that, again, the England teams now looking to introduce within their own game model. But I like that implicit learning, something behind the lines that you don't tell them. You might say to them, right, we're working on passing today, but actually what you don't know is we're doing this as well and you're going to bring it into the game. And when you do that and that comes off and they're playing diamonds and triangles and they have no idea they're doing it, you're sat there and you think that's brilliant. I've taught them something and they don't even know they're doing it. And they're more likely to bring it into that game on the Sunday. Whereas if I'd have told them, they'd have probably forgot. So that would be for me.
Sometimes putting on a session and not telling the players what it's about, just putting it on and then asking them either during or the end of the session, okay, what we're working on today, and seeing if they can get it. Because that's when you've cracked it, right? Because actually if they've worked out what they were working on without being told what they're working on, well, they're thinking then for themselves, they're learning, they're picking things up. And it's a deeper kind of learning, isn't it? It's the kind of learning that's actually going to have a longer term impact rather than just that in the moment kind of in the session, it might look like you cracked something, but actually it doesn't transfer.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And it goes back to that perception of, coaching feels that you have to teach them something in the game and they have to improve at a certain, let's say maybe diamonds. But the problem is when you're aware to that information, when you get into the game and there's nerves and anxiety, you suddenly fail and you forget how to perform that. Whereas if you've learned something subconsciously, then you're more likely to just do it in the game without thinking about it. And that's probably where the best players in the world, like, Ajax, and you see Donny van der Beek now at Man United. No worries, because he's done it for years and he's never thought about it. So, yeah, no, 100% agree with you there. It's brilliant as well.
And we ask every guest if there was just one thing that they had to change in the world of coaching, what would it be?
It's a tough question. I would change coaching courses. We are assessed in this country your level 1, your level 2, which is just where I'm at now. So, I don't know about the UEFA B, but from my experience in those, you're assessed by if you've made players improve at passing within that 30-minute session or improved at shooting. But from a sports coaching academia point of view, that isn't the best way of learning, because if you've improved it in that session, I can guarantee you, they probably won't reproduce it. They'll only reproduce it if you tell them to do it. So to me, I would change coaching courses and I would say, look, that's great, but really, can you just do a session? Can you get everyone involved? Are people enjoying it? Are they performing well? Can you add rules that's maybe these fundamental principles that we all want our England teams to produce, maybe like diamonds and triangles? And I'll keep saying it, but I love the concept of it. And if they don't improve in that session, don't worry about it, because that's not learning. Assess them after that 6-week block. That's what I would be teaching, and I would be saying as well. Don't worry about giving feedback all the time. Don't worry about giving instruction all the time. You can stand there. You don't have to say anything for that session and you're still coaching. And people think you're not. People think that's wrong. It's not. It's only because through our perception that you have to be doing something. You have to be talking. You have to be doing all this stuff with your hands and looking like, a Pep Guardiola on the touchline. And that's what people come to expect. But, for me, I would change. And it's difficult for me to say this because I'm not involved in NGBs or anything. But I would just change that and just give coaches a bit more support. Because I know, through chatting to a lot of coaches think that, but because of the environments and how they've been taught, they don't have that inner belief to go, I think what I'm doing is wrong, and I think what I'm doing might just be harming the players more than helping them. So, that would be for me, just tweaking that slightly and just going, look at the academia tells us, and there's a big practice is there, academia is there in football, and it's kind of not together yet. And that's, what I'm trying to do with my podcast as well. But that's what we know about learning. We know it's non-linear. We know that learning doesn't happen in the moment. We know it probably happens over a year or 2 years. So don't worry about if your session doesn't produce that, because that's not what learning is. That would be the change for me. And I realise I've droned on a bit there, so apologies.
No, it's a good one, Sam. It is a good one. I imagine it's hard, isn't it, to try and get a balance right. You've got to try and make a level that works for a kind of wide range of delegates on the course, plus you've got to find a way to assess it in a way. But I totally agree, and I think there has been a positive move from the old. I did old level 1, level 2, and then I did the youth mods, which were like a breath of fresh air compared to the old level 1, level 2. So I think they've moved it the right way. But you're dead right. This obsession with kind of focusing on a 45-minute or an hour session where you're going to see some tangible change or improvement in the player is, quite frankly, probably a bit ridiculous, because anything that's going to have some substance, it certainly in a competitive invasion sport, takes time to embed and build in. You're talking months probably. I always say to the teams that I coach, we don't win games on Saturdays. We win games in the 3 months beforehand. That's when you win the games. The Saturday's too late. What we doing 3 months ago, that's what's going to make a difference. And I think coaching courses should maybe look at that and say, okay, look at the coach's principles, look at the environment they create, look at the culture they're setting, the expectations. Yes, there's got to be some technical detail there around trying to support the players individually and collectively. But actually, if you think you're going to make a significant difference in one session, you're probably going to end up being a bit disheartened because it might not happen.
It's probably not going to happen for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're dead right there. You're dead right.
Thank you so much for your time today. Look, just before we finish off, what's your plans moving forward then? So you're in your second year of your Masters. Is this your final year then, is it? Yeah. So
final
pressure's
year.
on.
Yeah, it's I know. Not done that dissertation yet, 15,000 words, so that'll be a long summer school, let me tell you. Just kind of seeing what's happening. I'm open to opportunities abroad. We're lucky enough a couple of years back to coach in America for 3 months, coach soccer, and that was amazing. So, kind of seeing where we get to next September is where I finish the Masters. I'll have hopefully had a great season with Old Centralians women. Hopefully if coronavirus doesn't stop it all, but hopefully that'll have ended, and just kind of seeing what opportunities are going and what takes me. But I do really look forward to potentially working abroad, working in Portugal, working in Holland, where probably maybe some of my own beliefs now from tactical periodization, from the Ajax philosophy have kind of come from, and getting an insight more than just reading and watching football, getting an insight what coaching is over there. So hopefully in a year's time, when I might speak to you again on my own podcast, who knows, Scott, but maybe I might be over there chatting to you. So that'd be great.
It would be a real shame to lose you out of here, but you get your passion for I can see you fitting in well in one of those cultures where they have the same obsession to the way they want to play that you want to play. And I'm sure whatever you do, I mean, you're in a good position in the sense of you're a practitioner and an academic, and you put the two together very well from what I can see. And that's two wonderful things to have. You know, a lot of us can be practitioners maybe and not so good on the academic side, or more academic on the actual practice side, but you're doing both, Sam, and testimony to you for that. And I'm sure your players and your own journey will benefit from having that good understanding in both those environments. And whatever you do, I'm sure it's going to be successful. Best luck with the Masters.
Really appreciate that, Scott. Thank you.
How can people reach you, Sam? If they want, first the podcast, the blogs, getting hold of you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
I'm very active on Twitter, as you've probably seen. So Sam Holmshaw _MSc, I think is my Twitter handle. But if you go on my website, I think it's Samuel Holmshaw Football Coach.wordpress.com, I believe is the website. My phone number, emails on there, so just get in touch with me. I have one of those. That should be fine. But Twitter's probably the best way, just because I'm always on there promoting the podcast. So probably the best way to get in touch.
Yeah, and the podcast is the Sports Coaching Podcast, and that's available on the platforms like usual, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Same platforms as yours, Scott, all over the shop. So obviously doing quite well, aren't we? Sort of around, Sam. Look, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. As always, I learned so much. And the things you mentioned, I mean, there's loads in there. I read the blogs already, but it was good to go through them and get your insight on them. But things like about, realistically making a difference in one session, the dangers of giving immediate feedback, you're talking your links between the game models and tactical periodization. So much in there today, Sam, and I'm really grateful for your time, mate. And I'll be listening to the podcast as an avid fan, as I already am, and looking out for your next blogs that come out. So please keep the good work up. And if you're happy to come back at some point in the future and talk about your Masters and how that's gone and things, or just how it's gone with the girls team, I'd love to have you back on at some point, Sam, if you can make time again. Scott, it's been a pleasure. Really honoured and, to be asked to come on. I've really enjoyed that today. Answering questions rather than asking them. It's good fun. So what was easier then? Is it answering or asking? I don't mind answering, actually. I think I've done all right. You did it very well. Thanks, Sam. All the best, mate. I appreciate that, Scott. All the best. Thank you.